Sullivan! Randall's loud cry filled the little hall in the apartment, and the lizard glared harshly at the blue monster who walked through his door. It wasn't hard to tell that he was angry. Will you please explain yourself? What? Sully didn't put up an innocent face in order to convince Randall that he didn't know what he meant, although he knew too well why the scaly monster was so upset. However, before Randall got a chance to say anything else, Miss Lorenzo appeared behind him in the living room door with a smile. Good morning, Mr. Sullivan. Randy and I have been up for 2 hours already. We've cleaned the house and made tea. Would you like some? Sure, Sullivan smiled at the old lady before taking another look at Randall. The lizard was furious, and he leaned a little closer to the blue one. Whispering something, Sully interpreted as, we need to talk. Sully slowly moved his gaze over to the old lady again. You just go ahead to the kitchen, Gladys. We'll be right here. We're coming. The prune-resembling monster turned around and then round the corner, and in a second she was out of sight. Randall quickly grabbed a hold of Sully's fur and pulled him closer. Who are you to hire me a babysitter? She's been here all night. I know. I asked her to look after you before I left the building last night. You've been suicidal, and it hadn't been right of me to leave you all alone. Besides, I thought you liked her. She sat on my bed. You're not supposed to be alone. She sang me a lullaby. Sully had to bit his lip in order to keep himself from bursting out from laughter from Randall's last statement. I'm sorry. I'll tell her to be more discreet tonight. She's not staying here tonight. Yes, she is. She'll be here whenever I'm away. Like I said, you can't be on your own right now. Randall growled as he let go of the blue monster's fur. Really? And for how long are you planning to keep this arrangement going, I may ask? Until you're better, and I can trust you. Randall opened his mouth to say something, but Sully beat him to it. Relax. She's not going to spend all day with you. She's going back to her own place after tea. I'm here now. Some improvement, Randall hissed ironically. And speaking of which, why aren't you at work? It's 8:30. I took the day off to be with you. What? Why on earth did you bother? You'll get in trouble with the management. Well, no. The blue monster put up a shy grin. I sort of am the management now. Randall's face gained a look as Sully guessed to be the expression of someone who had just learned that Christmas had been canceled. You're the what? You boys are coming? Tea's ready, the interrupting voice from the kitchen said, and Sully hurried to push Randall aside in the direction. I'll tell you over tea, Randall. Great, I can't wait. The lizard rolled his eyes, but followed the furry monster into the kitchen. Without putting up a fight, he figured he'd probably been the lost case anyway. An hour passed since Gladys Lorenzo had gone back to her apartment, and Randall spent the second of it in the corner of the couch, pretending that Sullivan wasn't there. He was still angry with him for hiring the old lady to look after him, and ever since Sully told him about the new Monsters, Inc., he had been angry about that too. Randall didn't like the idea of Sullivan being in charge, and he didn't really think he liked the idea of the factory being changed into some sort of circus, no matter if it was successful or not. Okay, Randall, time to lighten up. Sullivan entered the room and sat down next to the purple figure, whose answer was to turn his head the other way and stare at the wall. Sully tried to keep his serious tone to his voice, but for some serious difficulties. The lizard was accepting like a little child in situations like this. He appeared to be at the same maturity level as his 3-year-old nephew. Sully couldn't help it. He found this particular trait of family resemblance extremely amusing. Randall, seriously, cheer up, he chuckled. It's not the end of the world. When Randall didn't respond, the blue monster decided it was time to change subject. What do you want to do today? Nothing. Well, we'll be bored then. Well, I'll be bored. We will. I'm going to be here all night, remember? Nobody asked you to. Well, you sort of did, when you showed me that you're not able to take care of yourself. Randall didn't come up with a good answer to that one. It occurred to him that in an incredibly annoying way, Sully was right. This whole situation was basically his own fault. He could just strangle himself. Get up if you can't think of anything to do, and I'll think of something to do for the both of us. Sullivan got up from the couch and gestured to the lizard to do the same. It's a nice day. We should start with a walk. Come on. Since the scaly monster didn't respond, the hairy one pulled him up from the couch and escorted him towards the door. Before Randall only knew that they were out onto the street again, on a morning stroll with the nice weather. The sidewalks had been cleared for snow, but a thick white blanket was still covering the rooftops with the small lawns between the buildings and Randall, dull in his neighborhood. The city had been quiet. Most of the citizens were at work, and the majority of monsters who were out were the elderly. Sully looked at him and chuckled to himself as he had thought of Randall's neighbors. The lizards surely hadn't chosen to live mostly in this part of town. The purple monster walked down a couple of steps behind the blue one, wearing a woolly scarf from the protection from the icy wind. He had no idea where they were going, but he wasn't liking or cared anyway. He had nowhere to be, felt that he had nothing to do. In a way that it felt some sort of just follow up along, not knowing what to expect. But he wished Sullivan could walk a little slower. Randall was a little weak from going too long without eating, and he had been hard trying to keep up with the blue monster. However, his pride kept him from asking him to walk slow down and wait for him. That would have been too embarrassing. The two monsters eventually entered the park and walked around a little road that stretched all the way through it. It was like winter wonderland there. There were tall buildings and busy streets. There were no bigger areas in the snow to gather. There were small stands that were selling coffee or hot chocolate, an ice-covered pond where anyone could ice skate, and a steep hill which was filled with happy children playing and sleighing down the snow. Sully had tried to come up with something good to say about sincerity to Randall, as if it was the right time to say something after nearly an hour of complete silence between the two. But it was just the thought of something was interrupted with a happy voice. "Ollie!" He turned around to his head to notice Rex at the bottom of it. There was some of the children from daycare with a teacher that Sully didn't know, and at the moment he was waving at Sully. His hands were holding on to the sled and with a fourth. The blue monster was about to go over there and say hello, where he suddenly remembered who stood beside him, Rex's uncle. He turned around and looked at Randall, who seemed to have frozen to the ground. His eyes were on the little orange monster a few meters away. He looked terrified. "Are you okay? He's coming over." Sully turned around the other way again and saw Rex running towards him. "It's okay, Randall. I'll take care of it." That was all reached before Rex approached him with a big grin. "I missed you, Ollie. Have you missed me? We wanna be best friend?" Sure. The hairy monster took one last look at Randall to see how he was doing before he got down on his knees to meet Rex with a friendly hug and a hello. Rex was obviously happy to see him again and babbled on about everything as usual. And as usual, Sully didn't really understand half of it. "Did you see me I sledged down the V? It's high. I'm very brave. And you think I'm brave? I ate cake. And are you brave, Ollie? You want to be best friend? Who's that?" The little monster suddenly stopped talking and pointed at his uncle, who didn't seem to know what to do. He just looked at Sully with eyes expressed anxiety and despair. The blue one felt a ray of sadness strike his heart. Rex didn't know who even Randall was. "That's my friend," Sully said eventually, placing a hand on Rex's shoulder as he tried his best to explain. He didn't want to be the one telling Rex that his uncle was back from banishment, and that would probably result in an awkward conversation with Sophie tomorrow. Instead, he just smiled and went on. "He's my friend. His name is George." Randall raised an eyebrow. "George?" Rex mimicked with a grimace, looking at the purple monster who kind of reminded him of his mom. However, he didn't think about it very long. There was too much going on around him. "Ollie, wanna try my swish?" He then held up his sledge up to Sully, who tried to talk him out by making gestures with his hands. "No, I think I'm busy. I'm out with a walk with George. Please." Sully took another glimpse at Randall, who looked as the entire world had just landed on his shoulders. The blue monster took a couple of steps towards him, leaned in close, and whispered, "Look, George, I don't think I can get out of this without upsetting him. Do you mind if I just take one ride with him? It's easier that way." "Go ahead." Randall's voice was almost a whisper, too. He avoided Sully's eyes as usual, as he tried not to look at his nephew, who wanted impatiently for Sully to ride down the hill with him. Seconds later, Sully was on his way up the hill, dragging Rex on the sledge behind him. The little monster was already laughing with joy, but the blue one felt straight out terrible. He then noticed an ache from his heart from Rex's uncle, who waited for him at the bottom of the hill, with the pure grief written all over his face. Sully thought it was no wonder why the other monsters of the park had noticed the condition. It was called mental ward. Once they reached the top, Rex commanded Sully to sit down on the sledge with him, and when he did so, the little monster gently placed himself in the furry one's lap. Lot of speed! He turned to his head and looked at the passenger with anticipation, and Sully used his arms to create what Rex was asking for. Speed, lots of it. The ride was short, but surprisingly entertaining. Sully laughed and shouted with Rex, and there was even a couple of times where he got even eager to even almost fall off the sledge. When they were back down safe again, he got up and brushed the snow off his fur, only to reveal the new request from Rex. Again! After making sure Randall was okay with it, Sully dove round down the hill with excited Rex again, and again, and again. The little monster's joys and yells echoed his ears. Once they reached the bottom for the 7th or 8th time, the blue one suddenly made a decision. He got up and walked over to Randall and pulled him towards Rex and sledge. You know what, Rex? I think George wants a ride too. Don't you dare, Randall whispered with a flaming glare. It couldn't help much, though. Sullivan pushed the lizard up the hill, with Rex safely placed on the sled behind him. It'll do you good, Randall. Sully lowered his voice down to a whisper to make sure Rex wasn't catching up. It's fun. Well, we'll see about that, Randall growled back. He probably would have said something more if he didn't make it. There was some sort of out of breath, walking up towards the steep hill, and he became, if possible, even to annoyed Sully, who smirked at him too. Who knows, maybe it'll improve the shape you're in too. When they reached the top once again, Sully sat down on the sledge. Rex took a place in his lap as usual, eager for another round. As they both turned to look for the lizard, who needed a little bit more time to reach the top of the hill, and when he did, his breathing was rather heavily as he walked over to the two monsters who were waiting for him. You'll have to sit in the back, George, the blue monster said, looking at Randall, who realized he had no other choice. He sat down behind Sullivan, his arms hanging loosely from the sides. I think you better hold on, Sully said, while staring at him, and the lizard rolled his eyes and his upper arms carefully on the blue monster's shoulders. Now, hard could it be best to keep oneself from falling off this thing? Moments later, Sully used his big arms to move the sled towards the edge of the hill, and the three monsters started to make their way back down again. It was a lot faster and this time. Wow, it was the additional passenger on board, even though Randall wasn't the heaviest citizen of Monstropolis. Participating not these days. Rex screamed with joy before, and Sully couldn't help but laugh too. If not from the ride, then at least the little monster's enthusiasm. Although he's playing with the snow did bring him back some joyous childhood memories. The blue monster tried to turn his head to see what Randall thought of the experience, but he decided it was probably safer just to look forward. By the time they reached down to the middle of the hill, the speed increased, and in front of Sully and Rex was still laughing and shouting. His loud, happy cries reminded the blue monster of Boo. He remembered on how she had been laughing exactly how every time Mike hurts himself, and as Sully started thinking of her, he felt a cloud of sadness come over him. Luckily, as they rode down the small bump that caused the sledge to jump, something suddenly distracted Sully from his thoughts and pulled him back to the moment. He suddenly felt another set of arms gripping around him from behind, clinching tight. Randall had held on to him with all four of his arms now, in a very particular way that made Sully's stomach jump. When the lizard finally started to trust him, he couldn't explain the weird feeling from his gut. Look out! The loud shriek caused Sully to stop thinking again and regain his focus on what was happening. They were about to hit a couple of female monsters with the baby carriages, and the blue monster turned the sledge instinct, causing it to crash into a pile of snow. Everything went white, cold, and wet. Sully crawled out, trying to figure out which way was up, and when he found Randall, his tail was in his face, and Rex was on his feet was on his chest. The snow absolutely was everywhere. Eventually, managing to dig his way out, Randall's head popped up from beside him, and turned to Sully's surprise, the lizard grinned. However, he replaced it with a frown with the second that he noticed that Sullivan was watching him. Darn it, Sullivan, are you trying to get us killed? He coughed a couple of times and looked over in another direction. I thought that's what you needed. Very funny. The lizard found his way out of the snow and brushed it off. He couldn't remember the last time he rode on the sledge, and he had to keep his face away from Sullivan, who, as the blue monster couldn't really see, was actually struggling to hold back a smile. That would have been embarrassing. Again! Rex finally made his way out of the snow and climbed onto Sully's back. Ali! Again! I'm getting tired. Sully's answers brought back out to disappointment in Rex's face, but the furry monster continued a hopeful voice. Maybe George will take you for a ride. Sully looked over at Randall, who turned to meet his gaze, and desperately indicating that it was a bad idea. He didn't want to be alone with Rex. Luckily for Randall, Rex's teacher called for the little monster, telling him it was lunchtime. Sully decided that much to do Rex's prayers that he and Randall could join the children for their meal, and eventually they'll all sit down together. Rex even shared his hot chocolate with Ully, but he was less eager about sharing it with the Snowedge. After all, he didn't even know this guy. Suddenly, he started to share his best friend with. The teacher who escorted the kids, newly hired at Monsters, Inc., so like Rex, she didn't know who Randall was. Sully was happy to hear about that. He could imagine Randall was too, at least, looked relaxed at the moment. After a long lunch break, a couple of more rides down the hill and said goodbye to Rex, who had been crying, and walked back home. Sully and Randall made it back to Randall's apartment that afternoon. They were both exhausted, and although Sully's weren't really showing, they had rosy cheeks spreading all across the hours of outdoors. Once back inside, the blue monster made them dinner, and Elise called for pizza. Randall sat on the table, and eventually the duo sat down with their food, and pleased Sully to see how much Randall's appetite had increased only from yesterday. Silence was still awkwardly present between them, but Sully was okay with it. Randall had talked down as he had something to say, and that it was fine. Besides, the furry monster guessed that the lizard would open up to a bit more once they got to know each other better. After all, only a couple days had passed, and he hadn't talked at all. I haven't seen him since he was 1 year old, you know? Sully looked up at the speak of sun. Randall had said something. The blue monster wasn't sure about that. What? I haven't seen him in 2 years. Who? Rex. Randall looked down at his empty plate, with careless look on his face, as if he was talking about the weather. I figured it was a long time ago. He didn't recognize you? Randall felt silent again, and Sully took another bite of his pizza slice. You okay? Sure, he's not my kid. He's your nephew. How do you know him? Randall asked, looked up at his face Sully. Sophie. I'm friends with Sophie. I didn't know that. I haven't known her for a long time. I first met her the day we came together, and I gave her your belongings. She wanted me to come with her. We kept in touch after that, and talked about work and stuff. I see. Silence took over the living room again, until Randall, much to Sully's surprise, decided to speak once more, eyes back down on his plate. Does she know, Sophie, you have told her about me? No. Do you want me to? Randall looked at Sully again, and for the first time during their conversation about the lizard's family, the blue monster noticed there was some sadness in his eyes. No, I don't think so. Not yet. Sully nodded. He understood. They sat on the couch for another while, until they decided that it was time to clear the table and load their dishwasher. Randall did it this time. Knowing that there were some things going, Sully had to chuckle at the lean, purple monster in the kitchen. He was such a neat freak, and apparently a control freak too, and the furry one found himself looking from the other living room. It was good to see Randall in action, doing some stuff other than mutter on the couch, or beneath his undercovers of his bed. After an hour and a half, Gladys Lorenzo knocked on the door, and she was there for the evening shift. Before Sully headed back home, three of them had some tea together. I'll have to go to work tomorrow, Randall. Sully placed his teacup on the table. Are you going to be fine with Gladys during the day? I'll check on you in the afternoon. Sure. I can have some tasks for you tomorrow, Randy. Miss Lorenzo shot in. You can help you do groceries, and then there's this nasty little night light bulb in my bathroom mirror. You think you could fix it? Sully chuckled, and it sounded like Randall had work tomorrow as well. Eventually, the blue monster got up from the table and headed towards the door. Gladys removed the teacups, and Randall followed Sully out of the hallway. The purple monster still had a frown on his face, but his mood and manner had really improved the last few days. Today he even said goodbye and closed the door, and Sully felt weirdly warm inside as he headed back to the outside into the frosty city landscape.